think this is Kanchan's debut. Please don't make it awkward
No. I
for
have
us.
been here earlier.
Oh,
No,
you
he's been
have.
here before.
Then you
He's
know what
been here
Abhijit is
before.
all about.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Sunday Club. And we're going to dive right into it like we usually do without much ceremony. Although we are talking about the BBC, but even then, we're going to go really quickly into our discussion. And of course, this week there was lots to discuss, but there was a twist in the tail with the BBC releasing a documentary on Prime Minister Modi. Surprise, surprise. And on 2002, surprise, surprise. And really, I mean, that documentary, the timing, the content, all of it is really suspect. I must say that I have actually watched the first part of that documentary, and I'm here having watched it. And I think Sandeep and Pallavi have also taken a look at it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
Brief.
yes.
So yeah,
All,
so we're here after watching it, and we have a lot to say about it. But I'm going to dive right into it. Sandeep, of course, joining us from Bangalore, Pallavi from New Delhi, Professor Sen Gupta from Jammu, and Lady Chamli from, I don't know where she's from actually. She'll let us know. But since we like,
yeah, you knew how to pronounce my name. Most of you dirty black native savages don't know how to pronounce my surname.
He's
so Lady
joined from Ludhiana. He'll call it London.
Listen, at the Sunday Club, we like to be balanced. We like to hear all versions. So that's why we wanted to invite Lady Chamli on so that we get the Auntie Beeb's version as well. And of course, Kanchan Dada, who's looking more and more like Tagore, is joining us, and veteran journalist, advisor to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, tracks all of this very carefully. And we've just had a surprise guest as well. And here he is. Can you all see him? Why can't we
Ooh.
see him? There, at the bottom of my screen. Oh, okay. Maybe I
can't
need
see
to
him.
Your
remove
screen,
my.
not mine.
I see somebody at the bottom there, but I guess his electricity has gone off because, you're a third world country that can't ensure supply of electricity.
Well,
What's
that
going
might be right,
what's
Lady
going on
Chamli.
with lights around
How
killing
long do we have to tolerate this lady? I just want to know that.
Oh gosh.
Acha, Raju
Okay,
Tuli.
Dada, let's start with
Oh.
you.
No, I mean, what is the focus of what we are going to talk about?
The focus, I think, the primary focus is, I saw the documentary. It was basically a lot of what has been said over the last whatever, how many ever years, especially in the run up to 2014, and all of these issues were decisively settled by the Supreme Court of India. So I'm curious to know from you about the timing of this documentary and its release, and really the purpose behind it.
Well, there are, I think, multiple ways of looking at it. Uh, this is not the first time that the BBC has done a hatchet job on India. This is not the first time that the government of India has responded in a stern manner. And in a sense, it was expected. We knew about it about a month and a half ago that this was happening. And they had contacted us asking for a comment, which was refused to them, and rightly so, because you would give them uh, say you would give them something for about 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 10 minutes, and they would just use about 30 seconds of it and then say that, see, we got in touch with the government of India, and therefore, we are in the right. Now, we did not want to get into that game, and they were told that, sorry, we are not going to talk to you. Please go ahead and do whatever you wish. Uh, Now, the consequences which have followed subsequently, the video has been blocked, and all platforms which carry the video or excerpts of it have been blocked. The Any social media platform which uses that content, that particular account will be blocked, and any Twitter handle which promotes the content will be blocked. So broadly, this is the action. Now,
Mhm.
there has been some criticism, including from my friend Mr. Iyer, Mitra over here, but people don't understand there's a difference, fundamental difference between banning something and blocking something. Blocking is an emergency measure which is exercised. Government came to the conclusion on the basis of multi-ministerial inputs that this content needs to be blocked, primarily because government does not, I mean, there was reason to believe that this content would give rise to certain law and order issues over here. It was not, it was this particular two-part series was not something very innocent. There was something, it was devious in the sense that the purpose was to create some turmoil, instigate some violence, reopen certain issues before January 26th and during the G20 year. Now we have seen how misperceptions, misunderstandings, and uh, purposefully misunderstanding something like, say, the CAA can cause huge turbulence in this country, and we did not want it. Government's primary responsibility is to the people of India. It's to maintain law and order. And keeping that in mind, government exercised its emergency option under the IT rules, which are sovereign laws in India. Now, if you give me 30 seconds more,
Sure.
I will just to put some context to what this panel should be discussing today. You see, the BBC, unlike the New York Times or the Washington Post or the AFP or the Associated Press or Reuters, the BBC is something totally different. It's a different beast. It was conceived, the BBC World Service was conceived as an imperial service, as a centralized news dissemination service. And this was properly proposed in 1924 and finally came into being in 1932. And it was called the Imperial Service. So today's BBC World is a direct descendant of that Imperial Service. And in India also, before 1947, it was the Imperial Service. And after 1947, it evolves into the BBC. Now, the BBC comes with a certain baggage, certain ideological baggage, certain uh, baggage of conceived or preconceived superiority, that it still represents the king and the crown. And uh, much of the problem stems from that. So Churchill's white man's burden becomes BBC's white media's burden. And this is a problem which has come up again and again in I think in 1969 or 1970. The BBC did a similar two-part series on India. It was broadcast on BBC Two, and the same channel. And the first part, I think, was called Calcutta, and the second part was called Phantom India, and or vice versa. And it was basically raw footage which had been shot by Louis Malle, and it was sold to BBC, and BBC just put it out. It was a random documentary showing the grinding poverty in India, how people squat on the streets, how there's no food to eat, etc. And the government of India then had similarly asked BBC not to not to telecast something so biased, something so one-sided. BBC had refused, and they had gone ahead and telecast both the parts. In 1972, the government actually they cancelled BBC's license and they expelled them from the country. So BBC has a history of getting kicked out of this country, and people who are crying about, oh, censorship, oh, freedom of free speech, their political predecessors took this decision. Again, in 1975, 41 Congress MPs petitioned the government that this wretched news service should be prohibited in India. It just shows anti-India material. It serves no purpose. It ends up spoiling India's relationship with other countries, and there is no purpose. There is no purpose served in allowing them to continue to operate out of here. And I can go on and on and on. The famous another famous BBC quote unquote documentary on Kashmir, and the entire documentary was actually based on footage out of Chechnya. They showed tanks in Chechnya, and they said that the government of India has sent out tanks into the streets of Srinagar. So this is the quality of their reportage. This is the quality of their this is the standard of their ethical practices, and that's how it's happening.
Right, Dada. I think your camera has been turned off, I think, by error. But coming back to the panel, Dada is making some powerful points, almost like maybe we're looking at some action being taken against the BJP. I'm not the BJP, but the BBC. Professor, how do you view this situation? Do you think it's time to kind of get back? And I want to add one more documentary to the list that Dada was talking about, and that was India's Daughter, if you remember, post Nirbhaya, and the kind of angle that took, and the way it represented the country over one very deeply tragic case. So please go ahead, Professor.
So I tried to watch this particular documentary. Mohiwa Mohitro had given a link, but that link, unfortunately, buffering time was so big that I just couldn't watch it. So if you want to make a documentary on Gujarat, I believe anybody has the right to do it. The question is that if I were a serious documentary maker, no matter what my political leanings were, I would take into account the fact that the Supreme Court, in a sense, has also been petitioned and arrived at judgment on this particular regard. So if I wanted to revisit the case, I would look at what the Supreme Court has said, and then if I would say why the Supreme Court judgment was in error, why it was flawed, and so on and so forth, which witnesses should have been taken, and so on and so forth. To the best of my knowledge, the documentary does nothing of its kind. I think if you watched it, does it refer to the Supreme Court judgments? I believe it does not. Does it? No. It does not, right?
The only caveat it puts kind of belatedly every once in a while is that vigorously contested. Vigorously contested.
Vigorously contested. Now the question is, okay, you contest it. As simple as that. You tell me why their lordships were wrong. What was the nature of the witnesses? Why did they disallow certain witnesses? Have a debate on this. You do nothing of that kind. The problem is, in the Indian judiciary system, becomes a bunch of wogs with gowns which we gave you anyway, using a language which we gave you anyway, a procedure which you gave you anyway. So these wogs can do whatever we want. This is what we do. Look, banning BBC or not banning BBC is not a question. I think what is already happening is the following. In 1984, when Mrs. Gandhi was murdered, we didn't look at All India Radio. We tried to get news from the BBC. Today, nobody does that. And that is the extent of the BBC's reputation's disrepair. They are completely in a state of disrepair, but that mischief does not go away. What is the kind of mischief that they do with respect to India? Look, they've bought out 2002, what happened in 2002, trying to bring it back to the fore for a number of reasons. I think they're trying to hit several birds with one stone. Kill is too strong a word. But the fact is, there are so many things that have gone on in Pakistan for such a long time. How come none of them merits any attention of this particular kind? So many things are going on in Bangladesh over these years. Nothing merits attention. So many things are going on in Iran, Afghanistan, and so on and so forth. But for reasons best unknown, there is completely silence on this. And in 2022-23, you basically come out with something that happened in 2002. Look, there is no doubt that G20 is an issue. We are taking over the leadership of the G20 at a time when our credibility, when it comes to managing COVID, when it comes to managing our economic affairs, is at an all-time high. Our relationships with the Russians and the Americans are pretty good. So we, in a sense, have a pretty good chance of
Yeah.
actually implementing some sort of an agenda if it needs to be implemented, because we can hopefully count on support from all sides.
Okay.
But there is also the question that how you try to embarrass Rishi Sunak by basically using this particular documentary. So you have a Pakistan origin MP, talking about atrocities in India, completely silent, brazenly silent about what goes on in Pakistan, trying to embarrass the Prime Minister, who puts it down with a single line retort that I don't agree with that particular characterization. At one level, I think ignoring what the UGC makes sense. But the fact also is, I think today in social media, India is sufficiently awakened to actually take the battle to the BBC, and that is what we must do.
Lady Chamli, what do you think? Do you think we need to ban the BBC, or do we need to hold on to Auntie Beeb? What's your take?
You see, I'm of the opinion that you're all very confused. Both the gentleman that went before me, you seem to have this very petulant attitude, is this inferiority complex of belonging to a third world country. Of course, this is only to be expected. Remember, our per capita income is quite significantly greater than yours. It's about, I think, the last I checked, it was about 24 times yours. So this is natural. But let me respond to the specific allegations that have been made by these two, natives. First, the gentleman who spoke first, he wanted to kick the BBC out. I dare you to do it. I dare you to do it, sir. Do kick the BBC out. Let's see if you have the guts to kick the information service of the greatest force of good the earth has ever seen, the British Empire, out. You do not have the guts to do it. You never had the guts to do it. We gave you your independence. You did not take your independence. And just like that, you cannot kick the BBC out. Your government does not have the guts to do it. First. Second, we did, in the interests of fairness, because fairness is an English concept, I might remind you, which Indians know nothing about, did in fact give your genocidal government the opportunity to respond. In the interest of fairness, did you take it up? Of course you didn't. But then, after the documentary comes out, you have this very strange-looking gentleman thinking he looks English in a suit. He really doesn't. He looks like a native, coming around and saying, "Oh, this is a
Who's he talking about?
The MEA spokesman.
A colonial hangover. Did you or did you not have a genocide in your country? Did you or did you not fail to protect people in your country?" Well,
Thank
clearly
you.
you did. We are simply telling an informed audience, because remember, unlike your audience, the native audiences, the British audience is extremely highly educated. And they appreciate having a scholarly program telling them what happened in the dark days of 2002 in Gujarat. Now, it is extremely important that we understand that...
Abhijit, can you become Lady Chaudhary now? I mean,
Excuse me, madam. Please do not refer to me by my first name. You're not familiar with me. Thank you very much. And you must refer to me as your ladyship. Thank you. Now, it is very important that we understand this, that you now ban a documentary. This is, of course, your prerogative. The whole reason we gave you independence is so that you can make your own decisions.
Tamil pespa.
Yeah. Look at my face. You see me perturbed?
Tamil pespa, Abhijit.
You have chosen of your own free will to ignore top-notch journalism and reportage by the BBC. We do not need certificates from you people. We are the stock
अरे
standard. We
इंटरनेट
are
क्रैश हो रहा है
what is
मेरा बार बार. Advaita, tell this lady to speak in a way so that the internet can hear this. मेरा वाईफाई क्रैश हो रहा है यार इनकी बात से.
but then
Even internet is not able to bear it. What is she talking? वो क्रैश हो जाता है बार बार फिर दोबारा
He's
लॉगिन करना
always,
पड़ता है.
I told you na guys, ये हमेशा put on होता है.
look, just look, I'm a lady. I'm not even being allowed to speak, and I'm not just any lady. I'm a Grand Cross of the Order of Garter.
Only thing you're familiar with is Gata. But I'm going to get in Sandeep
One
Balakrishnan.
second, I haven't finished yet. It is important I respond to the.
We really don't want to listen to you anymore.
Now, again, the gentleman who spoke before me, he resorted to whataboutery. What about Pakistan? What about Iran? What about Afghanistan? And what about, this Pakistani MP who spoke about Pakistan? Well, in England, unlike maybe in India, our MPs can raise any questions they want to. And I want to emphasize the BBC is completely independent. We do report on Pakistan. We do report. In fact, a British citizen, Mr. Ali Akbari or something like that, was hanged. He was the Deputy Minister of Defense of Iran. And he was hanged last week. And we did report very
It's Iran.
And,
Okay.
I think the criticism here is extremely unfair. And, if you reply to us, it is unfair. If you don't reply to us, it is unfair. Of course, you don't have the guts to kick us out. I'll take you guys seriously when you kick us out. Till then, remember, we are a superpower and you are not.
All right, Sandeep Balakrishnan, after that, do you want to come in and counter
Yes,
some of the things?
Just 2 seconds. Just
Sure.
2 seconds. Whatever language he spoke in, nobody in England, Scotland, Midlands most of them speak Cockney. Most of them speak Cockney. They can't even spell their own names. So
Yes.
please, I mean,
No, Abhijit was speaking in Shashi Tharoor's accent.
Who? Bossy Terror? Who's he?
Okay, so Advaita, I'll come in.
Yes, please.
Well, why was surprised that BBC is doing this kind of a hit job, which is disguised as a documentary that people should take seriously. And the roots go back once again to the colonial times. And I think the underlying psyche is that BBC still thinks that India is a subject race and a subject country. And it hates the fact that somebody like Mr. Modi has not only won 2 consecutive terms, but he's speaking to the rest of the world on India's own terms in one sense. So then, of course, all these other motives that the coming elections next year in 2024 and rest of the international forces, all those what are loosely known as breaking India forces. A lot of things are at work but tell me, since 2002 all the way till now, what has really changed in the BBC's reportage about Modi particularly, and now his government, obviously? What was the kind of narrative they kept on running since 2014? In one word, it is a continuous strain of demonizing Mr. Modi, and now they can't stomach the way that he has succeeded. And throughout this period, 20 plus years, what was the image that the BBC showed to the world, along with its other folks in the global media? Did they show him? Did they give a balanced coverage of his stint as the chief minister of Gujarat? Did they show him as a good administrator? You simply can't win 3 elections based on hot air or doing Bharat Jodo Yatras. That doesn't work like that. What was, it was a single-minded focus. All the narrative about him was with a single-minded focus about centered around the 2002 riots, and falsely implicating him as if it was a settled truth, while the SIT itself has cleared him that that he had nothing to do with that. And in fact, one of the themes that Mr. Modi, ran his election campaign during 2014 was that he said, "If you find me guilty, don't ask me to say sorry. Hang me in the public square." Those are his words, and repeatedly he has uttered them throughout the speeches. So why does BBC simply want to?
And Sandeep, the other thing that they fail to mention is that when the SIT and all took place, it was a government at the center which was personally very anti-Modi. And that was the circumstances under which he was investigated. So you can't say that it was, and there was any kind of bias in that investigation.
Absolutely. It must be remembered that, among all BJP politicians, it was only against Modi that the UPA went after with such vengeance and vindictiveness. They wanted to nail him at any cost. Putting Amit Shah into jail, that was kind of a prelude to a bigger plot. In a way,
to break him and to kind of get to Modi. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're all aware of that.
Banishing him from Gujarat, making Amit Shah live in Delhi. Does the BBC mention all this? And who are the BBC documentary makers? Who are the kind of people they are speaking? Those who toe their own line. Ki dekho hamara script ye hai. Right? So you will find enough number of Rana Ayubs and Abhijit's close friend. Rana Ayub, you'll find those, any number of such people agreeing to the script of this BBC documentary. And I remember, Lee Kuan Yew once said of the Western media, including the BBC, that, look, you are a foreign media. You cannot play the role of an inquisitor or, question the way we do things in our country. You can't play the same role in a foreign country that you do in your own home country. And the government of Singapore is under no obligation to respond to you, either positively or, negatively to your criticisms.
And I found it, the interesting thing was they said that we spoke to many people for this documentary, reached out to many people, and there was people who were too scared to come on camera. And the interesting thing is that the only guy who comes
37 people
is a British diplomat, who comes under the cloak of anonymity. All the Modi critics, the well-known Modi critics who have kind of become cause celebrities because of their antagonism towards Modi are there front and center. And the only guy who's hiding behind, in the shadows is the British diplomat who obviously lives in England or somewhere else right now. So it's so absurd. But Pallavi, coming...
one brief thing. One brief comment. You see, they said they asked the government of India, to give a comment. Now, my experience with the BBC on that is a very bad one. There was a particular documentary on Jammu and Kashmir where they wanted me to comment as one who disagreed, on that particular line. So they take my comment, and when the final edited version comes out, they put it in a manner as if I'm supporting what they actually say. So when Swapan Dasgupta, who was interviewed for several minutes and then found to his horror that of the several minutes he was interviewed, a 30-second clip was inserted to completely distort what he had actually said or actually had meant, I was not at all surprised. So I'm extremely happy that the government did not comment before this thing was released, because that would have only given it legitimacy, number one. Number two, could have been used to actually strengthen what the BBC was saying. So I'm extremely happy that the government chose not to respond.
I just don't feel that anyone I don't know why people even spoke to them. If the moment the BBC comes to you with a documentary about Gujarat in 2002, that's enough red flags to you to say that, sorry, I don't want to be part of this because I know exactly what you're doing.
Rajiv, not just 2002, even on Jammu and Kashmir, on a host of other issues.
Absolutely. Yeah.
simply Adwaita, मेरा सिर्फ इतना ही कहना है इसमें why do people who have spoken, like Swapnadas Gupta or Swadesh Singh or the other names जो वहाँ पर हैं, वो उनको उनको वहां जाकर के बोलना क्यों है? बीबीसी है 2002 के रॉयट्स पे 2002 के दंगों पर डॉक्यूमेंट्री बना रही है, उनका लाइन क्या होगा, उनका स्टोरी लाइन क्या होगा? I mean, if you can't predict or if you can't see through that, you shouldn't be in public life.
Actually.
आप कुछ भी बोलेंगे, अभी डीप फेक का टाइम है, वो उसको कैसे भी प्रेजेंट कर सकते हैं ना, उनके पास दे हैव द कैपेसिटी कैपेबिलिटी टू डू दैट, राइट? वन टू इज, देखो इस मामले में एनडीटीवी ज्यादा ऑनेस्ट था. So when I
Yeah.
started writing for First Post, for Dainik Jagran, for News 18 and all, I gave one article to one of my piece to NDTV. उन्होंने सिंपली बोला भाई साहब हम आपको नहीं छापेंगे. मैंने कहा यार क्यों नहीं छापोगे, आपको भी तो बैलेंस नहीं दिखना है क्या? बोले नहीं हमें बैलेंस नहीं दिखना, हम आपको नहीं छापेंगे. तो सिंपल वी आल्सो गॉट पीपल्स कि अगली बार से जब ये कभी बुलाएंगे कुछ बात करने के लिए टीवी पैनल पे तो वो नहीं जानेगा, बुलाती है पर जानेगा नहीं. मतलब ये तो वही है, आप बीबीसी आपको बुला रहा है, बीबीसी आपको इंटरव्यू कर रहा है और आप बड़ा प्राउडली जाकर के बीबीसी को 45 मिनट का आप एक भाषण दे रहे हैं उनको, irrespective of what they are asking, you are telling something which you want to tell, but probably they will only show what they want to show, they will not show what you want to tell. सिंपल.
बिल्कुल. और इन्होंने
आपको लेजिटिमेट करना क्यों है उनको? आप एक भी ऐसा व्यक्ति उसमें, स्वप्नदास गुप्ता, सुदेश सिंह या कोई और बीजेपी का आदमी या कोई और सो कॉल्ड राइट विंग का व्यक्ति उस पूरी डॉक्यूमेंट्री में नहीं जाकर के बोलेगा तो दिखेगा ना. सो नाउ वी हैव टेकन योर वर्जन आल्सो सर, वी हैव गिवन यू टाइम, हमने तो आपको समय दिया ना बोलने का, आपका भी वर्जन डाला ना. तो इतना विवेक तो रखना पड़ेगा, कहाँ जाना और कहाँ नहीं जाना, इतना विवेक तो रखना पड़ेगा.
Absolutely.
पर अगर आप इतने इतने लंबे एक्सपीरियंस के बाद, आई नो कांचन da will get annoyed with me if I take the name again, Swapnada ka, but why should you be? फिर बाद में आप उसमें क्रिएट करोगे तो इतना लंबा बना था, उन्होंने इतना दिखाया था, तो आपको पहले नहीं मालूम था इतना ही दिखाएंगे ऐसे ब्रांड.
Well, just I'll come in for
तो
10 20 seconds.
basic simple. If somebody from News Laundry, if somebody from even now NDTV, if somebody from BBC.
Acha, he's left. But the other thing also, I just want to come in here. I mean, being a script writer, I know how these things are structured. The way they structured the documentary also, they started with a violent act against Muslims, a Muslim family that was visiting from England in the beginning of the documentary, and it had nothing to do with Gujarat. It was an isolated incident in another place, tragic, no doubt.
I have a quick point.
And then quickly, let me just finish this point. And then they came to Godhra and they just skimmed over Godhra. So they were already doing that balancing part in the way they were structuring this, storyboarding this documentary, because they wanted to minimize what had happened with the pilgrims on that train. And to me, also, I found that was extremely manipulative, because if you are telling the story of 2002, then you start from Godhra. You don't start from another incident that's happened elsewhere.
Absolutely.
So it was very much, done to manipulate the senses, to start with a victimhood of Muslims and then move into that Godhra incident, which kind of diminishes what happened with them at that point of time, and then of course jump into the riots that followed. Sandeep, going to you, and Abhijit, you had a point, and then going to back to Pallavi, also hasn't come in as yet.
My little spy in the BBC tells me they're actually really thrilled about everything that's happened, right? They're getting a lot of publicity and shit. They're getting a lot of support from the Pakistani community in the UK. They are essentially, and remember the Pakistani community, first remember the BBC's gone ultra woke. The government's been trying to control them for a while and they've gone ultra woke. They've been using to attack the government, and today they've attacked both Rishi Sunak and his one Muslim minister, that Zahawi or something like that. They've gone all out attacking him. And they are absolutely thrilled by the Indian reaction. They're now actually, they think that this documentary is going to win them awards at the moment.
Yeah, it might well
Pallavi?
win the awards, but since it is a hit job, it has to be manipulative, right, Advaita? It
No, but
was
it's
made
not that well made also, Sandeep. It's not that well made a documentary where
yeah.
it'll win awards.
अरे राणा
It's not.
आयुब क्या अच्छा लिखती है, उसको अवार्ड मिलते रहते हैं ना.
Yeah, I mean, it's not
Listen,
that.
listen, Advaita,
Well,
my dog's parts are better than Rana Ayub's columns. Okay, she
B,
still gets awards, no?
see, B,
So basically, understand, you have to tick certain lists: genocide, Hindu supremacist, this and that. You automatically get an award.
Pallavi, let's come to you finally. Sorry, we kept you waiting for so long. This has been a really big panel, and everyone has a lot to say on it. But Pallavi, this animus that the international media has towards the BJP, very rarely do you, and to Mr. Modi in particular, especially at a point where the Indian economy is not suffering in the way it is elsewhere in the world, where we've been able to handle our COVID quite effectively. We're on a strong wicket, going into hosting the G20 summit. Why is it so difficult for them to even write an objective piece? Forget praising. That's too far out, But because they
Yeah.
made all these dire predictions about how many millions would die in India, and that never came to pass. But okay, fine. So you don't have to acknowledge that we did a fine job given our population, given our challenges, but they don't even write a balanced piece, and this is like across the board.
So I've worked in the BBC, and in fact, Jill McGivering, who's there in this documentary, I remember after Mike Woolridge, she was my boss. So, and I was at that point of time just starting out. I was just a producer, which means I had to produce programs. And also with these Goras, there were two, three of them. There was Jill McGivering and there was one more. And I remember Satish Jacob was there at that point of time, but he was never given that kind of a bhav. No one is going to understand this, but this is something which I really saw firsthand. The racism was absolutely there in terms of the way they spoke to us, the way they treated us, the facilities they gave to us. And also, my job as a producer was, get stories which shows the dark side of India, because that was often the brief which I was given. I mean, very quickly, I remember there was this environment director who had come down from London and he wanted to go to this Bihar made that tiger sanctuary, that Vikramganj, if I'm not mistaken. So I became the producer for that show. So I had to fix up all interviews and all. And actually, they had many tigers. They had at least three tigers. But they told me that, listen, our focus is not going to be that. Our focus is going to be how there's poaching taking place. So, we were speaking to people who was the director of the sanctuary, and they were saying, ki, boss, it's not correct to say so. Poaching hota hai, but it happens world over. But we have the best tiger population over here. You should highlight that. So when I came back to Delhi and we were editing it, nothing of that was mentioned. And it was deeply embarrassing for me because the director started calling me up and saying, I fixed it up because of you. So I'm not very surprised with what the documentary has said. I'm surprised by two things. And this is something Advaita, you and I were speaking about. One, of course, the timing. I mean, suddenly what has happened that you need to talk about it right now. I mean, 2002 is a long way back. No election happening. I mean, I know the election's happening, but this is no longer a factor there. And frankly speaking, even a party like the Congress, and I remember the late Ahmed Patel had told me that the biggest mistake which Sonia Gandhi had made was when she referred to the 2002 riots and spoke about Maut Ka Saudagar, because something that has come back to hit the Congress party. So even their response to the BBC documentary is there. They are kind of talking about it, but they are talking more about the fact that because censorship ho gaya, it's been pulled off, and no one is going to talk about the Modi factor. So I'm very surprised at the timing, and I'm perplexed, I would say. I'm not surprised, I'm perplexed. Also, that why do they have to come out with this documentary right now? And which brings me to the point which you just made, the G20 summit. I also anticipate and I think that when we move up to 2024, more such kind of narratives will be pushed. What I'm also very surprised, and sorry, Kanchan, about this, because I'm a reporter, I cover the INB ministry, and I remember I had spoken to someone in the ministry and I said, why are you not doing anything about the BBC? They said we don't want to give them importance. But then now what has happened is that you've done what you should have done earlier, which is a very logical step taken by any government. I mean, the UP government also did that. And that is kind of put a ban on the links on YouTube and social media, Twitter, and so on and so forth. But you've now been called a government which is fascist. which doesn't allow freedom of expression, and you're just giving it to a platter on through the opposition. Then you can turn around and say, "Oh, we don't care what the opposition thinks," but I think they care. They are also reacting to that. I mean, I'm seeing them taking part in debates on television channels and so on and so forth, where they are defending themselves and they're tying them up as knots. I mean, if Kanchan is saying that they were aware of it, then I think something could have been done about it. I don't know what. And it's very clear it's not a balanced reportage. I'm a reporter. We are always told get both the sides of the story. Over here, even when they're talking about the Supreme Court clean sheet, they're making it out to be that he used it, he timed it, he orchestrated it so that he could contest and become the prime minister in 2014. You know, and then of course that Dawood example that they're talking about, the family. I didn't even understand the connection between them.
There wasn't one between that and this thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't. So I'm very perplexed about the timing. And I'm also thinking that there is going to be more such narrative which is going to be pushed forward. And now it's
Mm.
going to make this government look like a fascist government. That's exactly the kind of narrative which you're seeing in the social media platforms already.
Yeah.
Go to Twitter, you'll find that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, Dada, you
And
want to say something?
yeah,
Yes.
I mean, this whole thing of a fascist government, totalitarian government, authoritarian government, Hitler, Nazi, it has been said. It has, I mean, it has been repeated ad nauseum. So if you act, you are called names. If you don't act, you are called names. And this I began by explaining the government's primary responsibility. The government, it is not whether the government is hurt or offended or feels violated. Government's primary objective, responsibility, and reason of existence is to maintain law and order. We had sufficient inputs because, as I said, the decision to block and I repeat, block, it is nothing, it is not a ban. So I hope people understand the difference between the two. The reason of blocking this content was to ensure that there is no corrosive fallout in this country. Now, the decision was a multi-ministerial decision. I even went public and gave all the details. If you have seen
Yeah.
what I put out on Twitter, that these are the ministries that were involved. One of the ministries involved was the Ministry of Home Affairs. So we had specific and uh, actionable information that this footage would be used for instigating violent protests or disruptions or animosity over here in this country. And just as we saw something happening over the CAA, although the CAA had nothing to do with India's Muslims. Now, setting that apart, I mean, what the government could have done, government, of course, government knew about it 1.5 months ago, and of course, government decided not to respond to it because responding to something or giving your reaction to something which you know nothing. You don't know what will be the form, what will be the context, what will be the subject, what will be the substance of it, and yet you go ahead and say this, and then they will cherry pick one sentence from somewhere and says, see, we were right, and my project is a legitimate project. So I am not into that game and government is not into that game. Now that's one part of it. The second part is uh, uh, this whole thing about dark stories. Advaita made a mention of it, the storyboard. This storyboard is common to all white west media coverage of India. It cuts across media platforms. It is not unique to the BBC or to this particular screed of the BBC. It just cuts across all of white west media. uh, a couple of months ago, News Laundry has this annual event. It's their news festival. And I was invited to speak on a panel over there on how government perceives Western media. And the person on the panel, the bureau chief of the Washington Post, He actually said there in public in front of everybody. You know, generally our instruction is that all stories out of India must be negative stories.
Wow.
And they say it brazenly, they say it openly, they say it
I
publicly.
told you, I faced it.
So when when it is a stated fact, you know what you are dealing with. Why do you want to even try and become a part of it? Those who offered their comments, it is their business. I wouldn't want to talk about it. That couple of other points, you know, there is a uh, very sharp religious bias. Now you can call it anti-Hindu, you can call it anti India or whatever, but there is a very sharp religious bias. Now, story after story, including this documentary, then this morning I had to issue a very sharp reply to Yahoo News, and then there can be there are n number of others who keep on saying the train caught fire. After the train caught fire, it is as if there was this train in La La Land, and this train had a bogie called S6, and there was an internal combustion, and the bogie caught fire. Or they will say
Yeah.
it is claimed, or the claim is disputed. What is the dispute? Now, which leads me to the connected point. There has been an open trial as per the sovereign laws of India. There has been an open trial of those accused of setting the train on fire, or coach S6 on fire at Godhra on 27th February 2002. Now, there was a full investigation which went on for years. Accused were arrested, they were charge sheeted, the trial went to court. 31, 31 people were sentenced. Of them, I think 10 were sentenced to death, and 11 to 21 to life imprisonment, and various other terms of imprisonment. The case then goes to the High Court. The High Court upholds the conviction. What it does is that it turns the death sentences into life sentence. And so it is a trial court judgment which has been upheld by the higher judiciary, and uh, subsequently 4 more people have been arrested who were on the run. The remaining are believed to be hiding in Pakistan, and so the total number of convictions in this case is 35. 35 individuals have been charge sheeted and held guilty of setting coach S6 on fire of Sabarmati Express. And these people, they say, oh, the train caught fire. The claim is disputed. So what you are doing is this: the White West media refuses to acknowledge the sovereignty of Indian judiciary, the sovereignty of Indian law. Just as the BBC documentary does not concede to the Supreme Court appointed SIT and subsequent Supreme Court ruling on whether or not Prime Minister Modi, then Chief Minister Modi, had any role in the violence that followed the burning of coach S6 in 2002.
Right.
So this contempt for the brown man, this contempt for the brown judiciary, this contempt for a former colony. So the BBC and white West media, are guilty of sort of treating India's sovereignty with contempt. And lastly, the last point which I would like to make is, this whole thing, there is a settled protocol, a settled understanding of how foreign missions operate abroad, how Indian missions operate abroad, how foreign countries missions in India operate. A foreign mission in India can't suddenly one fine day just decide that we shall launch an investigation.
Yes, I wanted to get to Jack Straw because he
This
is
is
kind of
this
being
is
held up.
this is unheard of. This is unthinkable. This is unknown of. What Jack Straw had done, and that singular junior flunky from the British High Commission in Delhi, who actually had no idea where the state of Gujarat is located in India. And then they had the temerity to share their quote unquote report with other EU members in Delhi. And there was an outrage that how could you do it? And the foreign secretary had conveyed his strictest displeasure at that point of time to the heads of missions that you just can't do it. This is not done. You are operating in a foreign country. There are protocols that kick in, there are rules that kick in, and this is not acceptable. This is political interference. This is an attempt to influence due process of law. Now I will give you a corollary to this. When an Indian diplomat, a senior Indian diplomat, Ravindra Mahatre, was kidnapped and killed in Birmingham, UK. At that time, if you look up the reports of the BBC treated it as some sort of a footnote of the day's news. The and as a government, someone who works for the government, I don't want to get into details, but published accounts of that time show that the local police, the British agencies, they showed the least amount of interest in either the kidnapping or to tracing him. They could have easily traced him. They could have rescued him. They did not do so. There were demands, extraordinary demands by the kidnappers. They were Kashmiri activists. And those were dutifully splashed all over the British media. They were communicated to us. To her credit, Mrs. Gandhi acted the way she did, and and Ravindra Matre died. So
Yeah.
the Indian High Commission over in London did not send snoops to go and sort of investigate what happened, why it happened, how it happened, and then brought it out in a report. All India Radio and Doordarshan did not put out a report on this secret investigation. And lastly, Jack Straw, a man of such low morals and ethics, he is the one who justified this so-called WMD theory for attacking Iraq
Yeah.
and destroying an entire country, its civilization, its history, its people, and thereby birthing the Daesh. The birth of the Islamic State is directly linked to the invasion and destruction of Iraq. So that Jack Straw suddenly becomes a man of great morals.
I know. And so convenient, so convenient. Professor, you were sounding like you wanted to come in, and Sandeep, of course, please. We'll
Yeah.
keep it a little shorter, our responses, so that we can get more people in.
Sure,
Yeah,
very short response. You know,
yeah, I'll just okay. Good, good. Good.
you see, when comment was made about why did Swapan Dasgupta appear on the BBC? When you know what the BBC all about, sometimes you wonder how perfidious can perfidious Albion be, and then BBC does something, and you understand that they can be far more perfidious than you thought they were. There is no level below which these characters cannot fall. And yet, such is their credibility, they get away with it all. I think somewhere down the line, I think we have to basically stop talking to these particular persons. But as Maharaj Krishna Rasgotra, the Indian diplomat, used to say, the British, with respect to India, can do anything, and we keep on forgiving them. That, I think, is the foolishness that we persist in, the folly we persist in year after year after year.
Look, I'll make two quick points, Advaita. Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so point number one, again, this dates back once again to the colonial mindset. Like I said, BBC still regards, or rather, the large sections of the British establishment, it still regards India as a subject state or a colony. That is in the psyche. Number two, during the Second World War, especially during the Second World War, uh, okay, before I get into that, what is BBC's credibility within England itself? You have a large section of English people who actually distrust BBC, and there are a lot of these cartoons that are being that come out regularly, saying that, look, parents warning children that if you're a perfect liar, you'll get a job at BBC. So coming back to World War II, few people might know that George Orwell, who worked with the BBC from 1941 to 1943, he worked in the India division of what is India section of what was known as the Eastern Broadcasting Service or Eastern Service. And this Eastern Service, George Orwell's close friend was Mulkraj Anand. And he was requested by a guy called Mr. Darling, who headed that whole section. He was requested to Mulkraj Anand was requested to produce shows in Hindi. They used to call it Hindustani for its India listeners. Mulkraj Anand refused to join the BBC, saying that, look, it is not possible. I am a patriot first and foremost, and have close links with the Congress party, which was fighting for the freedom struggle. George Orwell, he was more or less a friend of India till the very end. And what he saw around him, he blatantly says, and blatantly and bluntly says in many places. In his, there's a beautiful book called The Unknown Writings of George Orwell. It's a fantastic book. You should see that and to know firsthand the kind of rot that the BBC is. And if anything, that rot has only gotten worse after 75, 80 years. So it was a pure propaganda wing that the BBC was drafted into the Ministry of Information of the British government of that era. So what they used to do, one thing, I'll just give you one example. At that time, 2 million Indian soldiers were drafted into World War II. That was the largest ever contingent of a military unit that participated in the war under a single flag. These are not my words. And Germany was the first to notice this, that you have 2 million soldiers coming from one country. And it also studied, Goebbels especially, he had studied the sentiment, anti-British sentiment in India. So with each victory of the Germans, they broadcasted their victory against the British and hammered it in India. The BBC was completely spooked at this. So they cobbled up this separate propaganda wing within the BBC to somehow do damage control. And Orwell was also part of that effort of that team, and he was taken to a staff training course which BBC had organized internally, and it was later known as the School of Liars. So this has been BBC's history with respect to India. Complete propaganda, and they can't stomach the fact that this hold has been more or less broken. It's not that they'll stop trying.
Yeah. Advaita,
Yeah, go ahead. And Pallavi,
you
if
talked
you want
about
to come ahead,
yeah.
we're about to
Advaita,
wrap up.
Just
yeah.
the second
You
point
talked about
I was about to make is that BBC's job with regard to India is made far more easy for a simple reason, but because we have so many traitors within our country per square meter. So they don't even need to be creative about propaganda. You have a lot of these, what is broadly known as the Lutyens and the colonial colonized ecosystem out here in India and various lobbies. which will give them more than they ask for.
Very briefly, Advaita, you
Yeah.
asked Kanchan Gupta whether he thinks that there's a media bias against India, Western
Mm-hmm.
media bias against India. I'll tell you this. I was a researcher with a French research center in India, and as part of my job, after conferences, I would meet a lot of Western diplomats. Among a certain section of Western diplomats was this fury. The word I'm using is fury. That India somehow did not disintegrate, that somehow it seemed to work. And they
Precisely.
couldn't figure out, figure out, how is how is India working?
Mm.
How is it that you are successful in these particular areas? And instead of changing their mindset, it made them even more furious, and it made them even more biased. This is
Mm.
something that has carried over in many media platforms as well. I would say that the French media, sections of the French media, in a sense, are far more receptive towards India, but there is no doubt that the old Anglo-Saxon media, Anglo-Saxon media, to a great extent has retained these particular biases. Elements
Mm.
among them would be different. They would try to look at Indian success stories, analyze them, etc., etc., etc. But if you look at the institutional setup, this institutional setup has a tendency to neglect any positive Indian story, be it economics, outside economics. Any success serves to make them even more furious. So and as the United Kingdom finds itself diminished, the BBC's agenda, in a sense, also has to diminish India. It will play up weaker countries. It will play up Pakistan. It will play up all the others, in a sense, to play a balancing game. This is
Mm.
what Britain has done for a long period of time, and this is, in a sense, a culture that has percolated down to the BBC. It is as if, there's a jugalbandi between the UK state and the BBC, one playing the good cop, one playing the bad cop, or sometimes both playing the bad cop to pursue a particular interest. If we are clear about that, I don't think the shenanigans of the BBC need bother us.
Advaita, I
Mm.
Yeah, but
just wanted to
but
make a last,
I yeah,
if you don't mind, I just want to, before I
yeah.
forget it, what is striking is that there a pattern is emerging. Uh, 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 some days ago, we had a DW report on
Mm.
how 2023 will be a year of intense Hindu Muslim violence in India.
Yeah.
Full
Yeah.
report. It was a video report. And then
Mm.
you have this BBC report, BBC feature. Uh, you know, something striking is uh, that state funded, state owned public broadcasters. BBC is not a private company. DW is not a private company, unlike New York Times or Washington Post or Financial Times or Wall Street Journal or CNN or whatever. So, for a public broadcaster to do a political hatchet job, automatically implies that there is some sort of institutional support, even if it is not, if even if it is not upfront institution, what is called the quote unquote deep state. So there is a deep state support happening for this, and
Mm.
the reasons are multifarious. I mean, if you have DW doing a hatchet job in India, it could be because EU and Germany are deeply upset over India not falling apart like they have fallen apart over the Ukrainian conflict.
Yeah.
And one could go on and on and on. Uh, Now, lastly, this again and again we come back to the same point. Uh, the bias, the inherent bias in white West media. This is, to my mind, it is for American media, it is racist. For European media, it is racist. For British media, it is racist as well as colonial. So when BBC approaches India, it approaches with a colonial mindset, a very racist mindset, and all that they can see are the potholes of the country. It's like that infamous book called Mother India, which was a drain inspector's report. So this is the continuing tradition of producing drain inspector reports. So that,
Correct.
that,
So
that is the reality. That is
yeah, so
the unwholesome reality.
yeah, so I so agree with Kanchan when he says that it's a public broadcaster. I mean, just see it this way, that would a Doordarshan or an AIR done a story like this on any other country without understanding that there are always not just political but also diplomatic ramifications? I mean, somewhere down the line, it's okay. We keep on talking about the fact, and I did speak about the fact that Rishi Sunak, endorsed us, but was that enough? And and also we are all kind of attacking and lambasting the BBC, but I have seen there. I mean, I've worked there, so I know that's what their agenda is always going to be. And having said that, that's the way they are. There are things which we need to be cautious about. It was definitely not a balanced report. I mean, not that we should not talk about 2002 or whatever, but it was not a balanced report. And I think political parties also should be very, very careful about whether your dislike or your opposition to one political neta is so high and so much that you're actually going to end up condoning one documentary which is definitely not biased, because tomorrow it's going to be also about you. I mean, tomorrow, if the same BBC, for example, talks about the 1984 Sikh riots, will the Congress or the TMC be that gung-ho about it? No. So, I mean, I think, and then as quickly to wind up again to the same point, I think when we
maybe
move closer to
Pallavi, the thing is that the BBC will not do a report on the 1984 riots, and I
Yes,
think they know
yeah,
that.
absolutely,
They won't do a report on that.
exactly.
absolutely.
So that's also what the Congress must think
That's the
about, and
thing.
the political parties will think about. Selective outrage is not fair. It's very convenient at times, but it's definitely not fair.
Yeah. Well, interesting discussion, and I want to thank our panelists for joining us today. And really, we'll be back next Sunday. Do like, share, subscribe to the channel. Do like so that this discussion reaches as many people as possible. And we'll be back with more topics, more interesting topics. Meanwhile, on an aside, on a on a lighter aside, I guess Meghan Markle and Prince Harry are not that off when they refer to Britain as being that racist, because we keep encountering it over and over again.
Yeah.
So there you go. But thank you
Yeah.
everybody for watching, and we'll be back next week. Stay safe.
And the lady
stay
is vanished. That ladyship has vanished.
The lady had a
Yes.
work call, and
Oh, yeah,
Suhail is in
right.
England. So maybe he doesn't feel safe talking about the BBC from England. He couldn't join us today.
Or
So
perhaps he's on BBC right now.
Yeah.
No,
Or perhaps Sohail is on
maybe
BBC
he'll
right
be on
now.
Yeah, I want to check his.
So thank you, Kanchana, for joining us
Thank you.
on this
Yeah,
very
Kanchan, it's so
important
nice to
program.
hear you actually, because I wanted to know what the government was also thinking about it.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of people in our comments who are really saying that ban the BBC, ban the BBC.
By the way, the
So,
Europeans have banned
and
RT. Russia
no,
today is
but
practically banned.
But Dada did start by giving us a whole list of where it was banned back in the 1970s and how it's not the first time it's happened. So maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but time will tell. And that's about it. And thank you, Teja Mysore, for reminding everyone to like the live stream. And it helps the video get much more of an audience. So that's true. Thank you,
Okay.
everybody. See you next Sunday.
Bye.
Bye.
See you.